So I just went through a breakup. Again. And whenever something like that happens, I have a habit of searching for stories just to make sense of it all. Maybe it's because I'm a filmmaker. Maybe it's because stories have always been the way I process things I don't know how to put into words. So lately, I found myself thinking about love, about loss, about holding on to it, about fighting for it, about whether people can actually find their way back to each other. You'd probably expect a story like that to come from some movie, novel, some sweeping romance. Instead, it comes from professional wrestling. I know what you're thinking. Professional wrestling? Two meaty men in their underwear slapping meats? What does that have to do with love? It's a world built on larger-than-life heroes, impossible villains, championship belts, and spectacular storytelling. But every once in a while, beneath the punches and the pyrotechnics, wrestling tells a story that's startlingly real. And for me, whenever life falls apart, there's one story I keep coming back to. A story about a special relationship, ambition, love, heartbreak, forgiveness, and the people who change us forever. This is the story of Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi. This is the story of the Golden Lovers. The day this trip didn't go accordingly to plan video dropped was the day of the breakup. Yep. Happy birthday to me. So if you can do me a favor and hit that subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but this is usually the time where I beg people to subscribe to my channel. So if you can do that, that'd be cool. Every great love story starts off with somebody searching for something. For Kenny Omega, that search began thousands of miles away from home. In 2008, Kenny wasn't the internationally acclaimed wrestler we know him as today. He was a talented independent wrestler from Canada with enormous potential. But potential doesn't often translate into opportunity. North America's wrestling scene was crowded with a bunch of people chasing that exact same dream. Everyone wanted to be the next breakout star. Everyone wanted to be noticed, but Kenny wanted something completely different. Kenny wanted to be the best professional wrestler in the world. Not the most famous, not the richest, the best. And to do that, he believed that he had to leave everything behind and make some big sacrifices. So he packed up his life, moved halfway across the world to Japan, a country where he barely spoke the language, where culture was unfamiliar, and where the style of professional wrestling demanded a level of athleticism and discipline that he had never experienced before. Imagine that for a moment. You're in your mid-20s. You left your family, your friends, your home, and almost everything you've ever known behind in the pursuit of a dream that might not ever happen. It's equal parts courage and desperation. And sometimes those two look exactly the same. Then Kenny met Kota Ibushi. If Kenny represented relentless ambition, Kota Ibushi represented something altogether different. Watching Ibushi wrestle for the first time felt impossible to comprehend. He moved through the air with elegance that borderlined on the supernatural. Gravity felt less like a law of physics and more like a polite suggestion. He wasn't just athletic, he was imaginative. Every match felt like watching somebody discover new ways the human body can move. But what made Ibushi remarkable wasn't just what he can do, but how he did it. He wrestled with joy. There was no bitterness, no ego, no sense that he was trying to prove that he was the best in the room. He wrestled with genuine love for wrestling. That childlike enthusiasm radiated with everything he did. Kenny had never met anybody like him. When the first two stood across the ring from another, there was instantly unmistakable chemistry. Wrestling is often described as a dance. And if that's true, Kenny and Kota knew each other's steps before the music even started playing. Kota would eventually win the match. But that didn't matter, because something bigger happened. It didn't take long before the two eventually became partners. Originally penned as the Golden Brothers for the unmistakable chemistry, the two decided to be called the Golden Lovers. And the Golden Lovers was fundamentally different. Their matches were spectacular, but that's not what people remembered. People remembered the smiles, the laughter, the effortless way that they enjoyed just being around each other. Outside the ring, they trained together, they traveled together, and for a time, they even lived together. When they made their entrances, they weren't trying to intimidate anyone. There were no grim expressions, no posturing, no attempt to convince the audience that they were the toughest men alive. Instead, they looked genuinely happy just to be together. And that happiness was infectious. Professional wrestling always celebrated violence. It often told us that the strongest emotion was hatred, that every great rivalry must end in revenge. So the Golden Lovers proposed something completely radical. What if the strongest force in wrestling isn't hatred, but love? Romantic love, platonic love, just love in the broadest, most human sense. The kind of connection that's almost impossible to explain, but immediately recognizable when you see it. Fans spent years trying to exactly define what Kenny and Kota were to each other. Were they friends, soulmates, lovers? Every person watching could see something different reflected in themselves. Some saw the love of their life, some saw their best friend, some saw the family that they'd chosen to be with instead of the one that they were born into. The Golden Lovers became whatever you needed them to be. Kenny and Kota were simply two young wrestlers that found someone that made the impossible dream of becoming the best in the world feel a little less lonely. Sometimes destiny doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it looks like finding the one person who makes a foreign country home. Stories don't stay frozen in time. People change, dreams evolve, and sometimes the team that seemed perfect, the people who once seemed inseparable, begin walking in different directions without even realizing it. Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi found themselves chasing the same destination by completely different paths. Kota Ibushi remained exactly what he had always been, a free spirit. He floated between promotions, wrestled wherever his heart took him, and seemed almost completely uninterested in the politics that consumed professional wrestling. Championships were nice, fame was nice, but neither of those things defined him. Ibushi wrestled because he loved wrestling. It was as simple as that. He was an artist that chose to express himself through this medium. Kenny, however, struggled. Where Kota won matches because of his God-given talent, Kenny began to feel outpaced by Ibushi. Where Kota was given more opportunities as a single wrestler, Kenny felt left behind in Ibushi's shadow. 3 years as a tag team, they would eventually face off against each other. And the two had another phenomenal match. Kota wrestled with his love of the sport, and Kenny wrestled with his desire to not be left behind. This match changed them. Kenny was shattered with the loss, and Kota was devastated by causing it. After that match, the two drift apart more and more. Kota continued to rise, even facing off against the king of strong style, Shinsuke Nakamura, while Kenny continued to lose. And one heartbreaking loss was by Prince Devitt, the leader of the villainous Bullet Club, a faction of foreign wrestlers dead set on destroying the tradition of Japanese professional wrestling. They'd use underhanded tactics, overwhelm opponents with their outgrowing numbers. Kenny now feels, without Kota by his side, that he will be left in the dust. Kenny has no one, whereas Prince Devitt has the Bullet Club. And when you can't beat them, you join them. So that's what Kenny did. He joined the Bullet Club. He also found a new identity altogether. Outwent the bright colors. Outwent the carefree smiles. Outwent the young wrestler who was genuinely happy to be side by side with his best friend. In his place stood a new moniker. The Cleaner. Dark sunglasses, leather jackets, a permanent scowl, and someone reborn with a passion dead set on annihilating all of his opponents. The Cleaner wasn't interested in making friends. He was interested in winning. And if somebody got hurt along the way, that was simply the cost of business. At first it looked like a simple character change. But with Kenny, something deeper was happening. The cleaner wasn't just a gimmick, it was an armor. Kenny had convinced himself that if he wanted to be the greatest professional wrestler on the planet, he had to become somebody capable of carrying that ambition alone. Love made you vulnerable. Friendships made you hesitate. Compassion slowed you down. He buried those parts of himself beneath arrogance, cruelty, and absolute confidence. And it worked. Kenny Omega wasn't becoming one of the best wrestlers in Japan. He was becoming one of the best wrestlers in the world. The accolades piled up. The 5-star matches were almost expected. Fans began talking about him as a once-in-a-generation talent. He had finally become everything he crossed the ocean to be. But one of the strangest things about this chapter, this story had no dramatic betrayal. There was no shocking chair shot, no tearful argument in the middle of the ring, no grand declaration that they were enemies. They simply drifted apart. And somehow, that's even sadder, because that's how most relationships end. Not with explosions, but with silence. A phone call that never gets returned, a conversation that gets postponed. Days passing so slowly until you notice that you've become strangers, until you realize you no longer know the person who knew everything about you. We eventually get to a match where Kenny's Bullet Club mentor, AJ Styles, battles against Kota Ibushi for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. In typical Bullet Club fashion, Kenny was supposed to sabotage Kota and give AJ the upper hand to win. But Kenny is torn. He holds back throughout this entire match, up until the final moments, where Kota climbs the top rope, but is stopped in his tracks when Kenny hops to the apron and pauses. The two lock eyes, and Kenny is frozen. He's stuck between the loyalty of the Bullet Club and the history he had with his best friend. This brief distraction allows AJ to recover and delivers the Styles Clash to Kota, and he eventually seals the win. After this match, Kenny is visibly distraught. Kota is heartbroken, not with just the loss, but the betrayal of his former partner. Shortly after, Ibushi disappears from the Japanese wrestling scene. And whenever Kenny is asked about Ibushi, there's always a slight hesitation. A pause that lasted just a little too long. His words had insisted that he had moved on, but his expression told another story. Because forgetting someone isn't the same as letting them go. And the harder Kenny chased greatness, the more it felt like he was running from something instead of towards it. Here's the tragedy of Kenny Omega during this era. He achieved almost everything he wanted. He had become famous. He had become respected. He had become one of the greatest professional wrestlers alive, and eventually winning the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. But somewhere along the way, he became something that Kota might not recognize. That's the cruel irony of the heart of ambition. Sometimes becoming the person you always wanted means abandoning the person you used to be. Before Kenny Omega realized what he had lost, every time the Bullet Club celebrated another victory, there was one person missing from the picture. The Golden Lovers hadn't ended. They had simply became two different people living two different lives. And sometimes that becomes the hardest ending of all. There is a saying that success changes people. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Success doesn't change people, but it reveals what they're willing to sacrifice. By 2018, Kenny Omega had become everything that he had dreamed of becoming. He wasn't just one of the biggest stars in New Japan. He wasn't just the new leader of the Bullet Club. He wasn't even just putting on some of the best professional wrestling matches anyone had ever seen. Kenny and his longtime rival, Kazuchika Okada, they became the only wrestlers in history to get an unprecedented 6-star and 7-star rated match. He was in the eyes of many fans, the best professional wrestler. He eventually made it to one of the most elite professional wrestling tournaments in the world, the G1 Climax. At that G1 Climax, he wrestled the hard-hitting Hirooki Goto. Throughout that entire match, Kenny was beaten, he was bruised, he was on the brink of defeat. So as a last-ditch effort, Kenny pulls out of his pocket a reminder of his former friend. Kenny delivers Ibushi's finisher move, the Shining Star Powerbomb, and Kenny pins Goto and wins the G1 Climax. He did it. He had finally climbed the mountain. But the heartbreaking thing is, he had never looked any more alone. Kenny had become more vicious, more ruthless, the most aggressive wrestler in New Japan, all the while continuing to be surrounded by the Bullet Club. The Bullet Club had given Kenny purpose, but it was beginning to rot from the inside. Ambition has a strange way of doing that. It's intoxicating when everybody is chasing the same dream. A year later, at the finals of the same tournament, Kenny suffers a devastating loss. After the match, Kenny is walking backstage, and he comes face to face with Ibushi. And this is the first time after that betrayal. Kota offers Kenny a hug to let him know that everything's gonna be okay, but Kenny doesn't accept. Things have just gone too far. But eventually, somebody decides that they deserve more. Cracks begin to appear everywhere. Arguments turned into betrayals. Friendships became alliances over convenience. What happens next is the American Nightmare Cody Rhodes wants the Bullet Club for himself. And the Young Bucks caught themselves in the middle. Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks have formed a team called the Elite. They were a group that redefined independent wrestling for an entire generation, but they were starting to collapse under the weight of their own success. And at the center of all of this stood Kenny Omega. From joining the Bullet Club, Kenny had convinced himself that strength meant standing alone, that needing people was weakness, that love, friendship, loyalty, those were luxuries. Championships were earned alone, legacies were built alone, and greatness requires isolation. Or at least, that's what he kept telling himself. Because if that wasn't true, then losing Kota would have been for nothing. It's remarkable how human beings can lie to themselves. Then on January 28th, 2018, the Bullet Club turns on Kenny. Cody Rhodes uses Kenny's love for Kota against him, and this culminates to the Bullet Club giving Kota Ibushi a brutal, devastating beatdown. And it's all stopped when Kenny rushes to the ring to save his old partner. This all leads to the decision that the Bullet Club must turn their back on Kenny Omega and kick him out in the most violent way possible. Blood in, blood out. A vicious assault with overwhelming numbers. Kenny is getting beat down with no help until Kota rushes to the ring. The Bullet Club quickly leaves the ring, and all that's left is two former partners, Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi. Kota didn't run down to the ring looking for revenge. He didn't scream. He didn't demand answers. He didn't even remind Kenny of everything he lost. Instead, he simply stood there, calm, patient, as though no time had passed. Because to Ibushi, it hadn't. When Kenny looked at him, you could almost tell the years just all came crashing down at once. The tiny apartment they once shared, the endless training session, the laughter, the matches, the dreams they promised each other, the person Kenny used to be. Then Ibushi did something almost absurdly simple. He held out his hand. That's it. No speech, no ultimatums, no conditions. Just an open hand. The hand wasn't asking Kenny to join a tag team. It wasn't asking him to fight the Bullet Club. It wasn't even asking him to forgive himself. It was asking a much more frightening question. Do you still believe you're worthy of love? Kenny looks up at the hand, weeping, because after all he pushed away, the betrayal, the words spoke negatively. Too much damage had been done. The scars just ran too deep. Kenny cannot accept his former partner. And for a moment, the audience's heart sank. Maybe this was it. Maybe the years had changed Kenny too much. Maybe some relationships do end. Then something extraordinary happened. The arena exploded. Confetti poured down from the ceiling as though somebody had just won the biggest championship in wrestling. Commentary can barely get the words out. There's not a dry eye in that arena. When I watched this for the first time, I was weeping with everybody in that audience. Think about how strange that is. In the world of professional wrestling, nothing had happened. No title changed hands. No tournament had been won. No villain had been defeated. Objectively speaking, wrestling had barely advanced at all. And yet, it felt like somebody had come home after being lost for years. 'Cause that's what the audience had been waiting for. Not another 5-star match, not another championship. They were waiting for Kenny Omega to remember who he is. That hug wasn't the climax because Kenny and Kota had reunited. It was the climax because Kenny had finally accepted something that he had been running from for years. That greatness had never required him to abandon the people who love him. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't someone fighting the entire world. Sometimes it's admitting to themselves that they can't do it alone. And in that single embrace, the Golden Lovers were reborn. Not because they had gone back to the way things were, but because they had become what they were always supposed to be. The Golden Lovers were back. And something had changed. They weren't trying to relive the past. They had grown. Kenny had become softer. Ibushi became stronger. Together, they defeated the Young Bucks. Kenny had finally conquered Kazuchika Okada and won the IWGP Heavyweight Championship with Kota by his side. The story wasn't about needing each other. It was about choosing each other. Then came the goodbye. Kenny had left New Japan to help create AEW, and Ibushi stayed behind. No betrayal, no hatred, just different paths. The Golden Lovers were separated once more, but unlike before, this wasn't because of heartbreak. It was understanding. Sometimes loving someone means letting them chase their dreams. When I started writing this video, I had just gone through another breakup. For weeks, I kept doing the thing we all do after losing someone. Replaying conversations, wondering what I could have said differently. Thinking about all the little moments that felt insignificant at the time, but in hindsight, felt enormous. Your brain starts trying to rewrite history. It convinces you that if you could just find the right sentence, the right explanation, maybe the ending would be different. Maybe that's why I started thinking about the Golden Lovers again. On its surface, it's a story about professional wrestling, about championships, tag teams, 5-star matches. But underneath all of that, it's a story about two people's lives that were changed forever just by knowing each other. And that's something we don't talk about enough. We tend to judge relationships on how they end. If they last forever, they were successful. If they don't, we call them failures. But that's not necessarily true. Kenny Omega would have never become the wrestler he became if it wasn't for Kota Ibushi. And Kota's story doesn't exist without Kenny either. Even when they were apart, they were still shaping each other's lives. Maybe that's what love really does. Doesn't guarantee forever, but permanently changes who you are. I've spent a lot of time wishing I can go backward. Back before the arguments, back before the silence, back before I love you was the last thing said. But stories don't move backward, and neither do people. I don't know what happens next to me in my story. Maybe this breakup is the end of the chapter. Maybe it's the end of the whole book. I honestly don't know. But I do know this. Every person who comes into our lives leaves something behind. A joke we still laugh at. A song we can't hear the same way. A movie we'll always associate them with. A lesson we didn't know we needed. Sometimes they leave heartbreak. Sometimes they leave hope. Sometimes it's both. And maybe that's why The Golden Lovers meant so much to me. Not because it convinced me that every relationship gets a happy ending, but because it reminded me that even when people leave, the love they give us doesn't. It becomes a part of who we are. But if this story has taught me anything, it's that love isn't measured by how long it lasts. It's measured by how deeply it changes you.